The province of Pomerania was a province of the Kingdom of Prussia and the Free State of Prussia from 1815 until 1945. Afterwards, its territory became part of Allied-occupied Germany and Poland. The name Pomerania comes from Slavic Pomor, which means land at the sea. The province was created from the former Prussian Province of Pomerania, which consisted of Farther Pomerania and the southern Western Pomerania, and former Swedish Pomerania. It resembled the territory of the former Duchy of Pomerania, which after the Peace of Westphalia in 1648 had been split between Brandenburg, Prussia and Sweden. Also, the districts of Schivelbein and Dramberg, formerly belonging to the Neumark, were merged into the new province. While in the Kingdom of Prussia, the province was heavily influenced by the reforms of Karl August von Hardenberg and Otto von Bismarck. The Industrial Revolution primarily affected the Stettin area and the infrastructure, while most of the province retained a rural and agricultural character. From 1850, the net migration rate was negative. Pomeranians emigrated primarily to Berlin, the West German industrial regions and overseas. After World War I, democracy and the women's right to vote were introduced to the province. After Wilhelm II's abdication, it was part of the Free State of Prussia. The economic situation worsened due to the consequences of World War I and worldwide recession. As in the previous Kingdom of Prussia, Pomerania was a stronghold of the nationalist conservatives who continued in the Weimar Republic. In 1933, the Nazis established a totalitarian regime, concentrating the province's administration in the hands of the Gauleiter, and implementing Gleichschaltung. The German invasion of Poland in 1939 was launched in part from Pomeranian soil. Jewish and Polish populations were classified as subhuman by the German state during the war and subjected to repressions, slave work and executions. Opponents were arrested and executed. Jews who by 1940 had not emigrated were all deported to the Lublin reservation. Besides the air raids conducted since 1943, World War II reached the province in early 1945 with the East Pomeranian Offensive and the Battle of Berlin, both launched and won by the Soviet Union's Red Army. Insufficient evacuation left the population subject to murder, war, rape, and plunder by the successors. When the war was over, the Oder-Neisse line cut the province in two unequal parts. The smaller western part became part of the East German state of Mecklenburg-Vorpommern. The larger eastern part was attached to post-war Poland as Szczecin Voivodeship. After the war, ethnic Germans were expelled from Poland and the area was resettled with Poles. Currently, most of the territory of the province lies within the West Pomeranian Voivodeship, which share the same city, now Szczecin, as its capital. Until 1932, the province was subdivided into the government regions, Stettin and Stralsund. The Stralsund region was merged into the Stettin region in 1932. In 1938, Grenzmarkt-Posen West Preußen was merged into the province. The provincial capital was Stettin. The Regierungsbezirk capitals were Kozlin, Stettin, Stralsund and Schneidemühl, respectively. In 1905, the province of Pomerania had 1,684,326 inhabitants, among them 1,616,550 Protestants, 50,206 Catholics, and 9,660 Jews. In 1900, Polish was the native language of 14,162 of the inhabitants, and there were 310 whose native language was Kashubian. The area of the province amounted to 30,120 square kilometers. In 1920, 1825, the province had an area of 30,208 square kilometers, with a population of 1,878,780 inhabitants. Creation and administration of the province within the Kingdom of Prussia. Although there had been a Prussian province of Pomerania before, the province of Pomerania was newly constituted in 1815, based on the decree concerning improved establishment of provincial offices issued by Karl August von Hardenberg on 30th of April, and the integration of Swedish Pomerania handed over to Prussia on 23rd of October. The Hardenberg decree reformed all Prussian territories, which henceforth formed 10 provinces with similar administrations. After the implementation of the reform, the new province of Pomerania consisted basically of its predecessor and Swedish Pomerania, but also of the Dramberg and Schievelbein counties. The province was headed by a governor with his seat in the capital, Stettin. It was subdivided into government regions headed by a president. Initially, 2 such regions were planned. Hardenberg, however, who as the Prussian chief diplomat had settled the terms of cession of Swedish Pomerania with Sweden at the Congress of Vienna, had assured to leave the local constitution in place when the treaty was signed on 7th of June 1815. This circumstance led to a creation of a third government region, Regierungsbezirk for the former Swedish Pomerania at the expense of the Stettin region. In early 1818, Governor Johann August Sack had reformed the county shapes, yet adopted the former shape in most cases. Koslin government region comprised 9 counties, Stettin government region 13, and Stralsund government region 4. The new parliament assembled first on 3rd of October 1824. Based on 2 laws of 5th of June and July 1823, the Landtag was constituted by 25 lords and knights, 16 representatives of the towns, and 8 from the rural communities. Subordinate to the provincial Landtag were 2 communal Landtag assemblies, 1 for former Swedish Pomerania and 1 for the former Prussian part. The counties each assembled a Kreisstand, where the knights of the county had 1 vote each and towns also just 1 vote. Throughout its existence, the province was a stronghold of the conservative parties. Infrastructure. In the 19th century, the first overland routes and railways were introduced in Pomerania. In 1848, 126.8 Prussian miles of new streets had been built. On October 12, 1840, construction of the Berlin-Stettin Railway began, which was finished on 15 August 1843. Other railways followed: Stettin-Koslin, Angerman-Stralsund and Zusau-Woolgast, Stettin-Stolp, and a connection with Danzig. In rural areas, many narrow-gauge railways were built for faster transport of crops. The first gas, water and power plants were built. Streets and canalization of the towns were modernized. The construction of narrow-gauge railways was enhanced by a special decree of July 28, 1892, implementing Prussian financial aid programs. In 1900, the total of narrow-gauge railways had passed the 1,000-kilometer threshold. From 1910 to 1912, most of the province was supplied with electricity as the main lines were built. Plants were built since 1898. The Wiener and Lower Oder rivers, the major water route to Stettin, were deepened to 5 meters and shortened by a canal in 1862. In Stettin, heavy industry was settled, making it the only industrial center of the province. Stettin was connected to Berlin by the Berlin-Stettin waterway in 1914 after 8 years of construction. The other traditional waterways and ports of the province, however, declined. Exceptions were only the port of Swinemund, which was used by the navy, and the port of Stolpmunde, from which parts of the Farther Pomeranian exports were shipped, and the port of Sassnitz, which was built in 1895 for railway ferries to Scandinavia. With the infrastructural improvements, mass tourism to the Baltic coast started. The tourist resort Binz had 80 visitors in 1870, 10,000 in 1900, and 22,000 in 1910. The same phenomenon occurred in other tourist resorts. Agricultural reform. Already in 1807, Prussia issued a decree abolishing serfdom. Hardenberg issued a decree on September 14, 1811, defining the terms by which serfs were to be released. This could either be done by monetary payment or by releasing title to the land to the former lord. These reforms were applied during the early years of the province's existence. The so-called regulation was applied to 10,744 peasants until 1838, who paid the former lords 724,954 thaler and handed over 255,952 hectare of farmland to bail themselves out. Tumults arose in 1847 in the towns of Stettin and Kozlin due to food shortages. As a result, prices for some foods were fixed. On March 2, 1850, a law was passed settling the conditions on which peasants and farmers could capitalize the property rights and feudal service duties, and thus get a long-term credit. This law made way for the establishment of rent-and-bank credit houses and rent-engit farms. Subsequently, the previous rural structure changed dramatically as farmers, who used this credit to bail out the feudal duties, were now able to self-determine how to use the land. This was not possible before, when the jurisdiction had sanctioned the use of farmland and feudal services according not to property rights, but to social status within rural communities and estates. From 1891 to 1910, 4,731 rent-engit farms were set up, most with a size of 10 to 25 hectare. Bismarck-era administrative reforms. Otto von Bismarck inherited from his father the Farther Pomeranian estates Kulz, Jarchlen and Nyafith. Aiming at a farming career, he studied agriculture at the Academy in Greifswald-Eldena. From 1867 to 1874, he bought and expanded the Varzin estates. In 1869, Friedrich Albrecht Graf zu Eulenburg drafted a county reform that was promoted by Bismarck. The reform passed the House of Lords on December 7, 1872. Most importantly, the reform cut the linkage between noble status and the right to vote. The latter now depended on property and not on status, aiming against the overrepresentation of the knights compared to burghers. On June 29, 1875, a new constitution for the province was passed, which entered into force in 1876. It redefined the responsibilities of the provincial administration and the self-administrative institutions, a Landeshauptmann and a Landesausschuss. The Provinzialverband was financed directly from the Prussian state budget. The Landtag was responsible for streets, welfare, education, and culture. Land ownership was not a criterion to become elected anymore. The provincial Landtag was elected by the county representative assemblies for a 6-year term. A subordinate Kommune Landtag only existed for Regierungsbezirk Stralsund until it was abolished in 1881. In 1891, a county reform was passed, allowing more communal self-government. Municipalities hence elected a Gemeindeverstand and a Gemeindevertretung. Gutsbezirk districts, i.e. estates not included in counties, could be merged or dissolved. World War I. During the First World War, no battles took place in the province. Nevertheless, the war affected society, economy, and administration. During the war, the provincial administrative institutions were subordinate to the military and headed by military officials. Mobilization resulted in workforce shortage affecting all non-war-related industry, construction, and agriculture. Women, miners and PAS partially replaced the drafted men. Import and fishing declined when the ports were blocked. With the war going on, food shortages occurred, especially in the winter of 1916–17. Also coal, gas, and electricity were at times unavailable. When the Treaty of Versailles entered into force on January 10, 1920, the province's eastern frontier became the border to the newly created Second Polish Republic, comprising most of Pomerania in the so-called Polish Corridor. Minor border adjustments followed, where 9.5 square kilometers of the province became Polish and 74 square kilometers of former West Prussia were merged into the province of the Free State of Prussia. After the Kaiser was forced to resign, the province became part of the Free State of Prussia within the Weimar Republic. During the German Revolution of 1918–19, revolutionary councils of soldiers and workers took over the Pomeranian towns. On January 5, 1919, workers' and soldiers' councils were in charge of most of the province. The revolution was peaceful. No riots are reported. The councils were led by Social Democrats, who cooperated with the provincial administration. Of the 21 Landrat officials, only 5 were replaced, while of the 3 heads of the government regions, 2 were replaced in 1919. On November 12, 1918, a decree was issued allowing farm workers' unions to negotiate with farmers. The decree further regulated work time and wages for farm workers. On May 15, 1919, street fights and plunder occurred following communist assemblies in Stettin. The revolt was put down by the military. In late August, strikes of farm workers occurred in the counties of New Stettin and Belgrade. The power of the councils, however, declined. Only a few were left in the larger towns in 1920. Counter-revolution, conservative and right-wing groups evolved in opposition to the revolution's achievements. Landowners formed the Pommersche Landbund in February 1919, which by 1921 had 120,000 members and from the beginning was supplied with arms by the 2nd Army Corps in Stettin. Paramilitias formed throughout the spring of 1919. Pommersche Landbund units participated in the nationalist Kampfputsch in Berlin, 1920. Members of the Iron Division, a dissolved Freikorps in the Baltic, reorganized in Pomerania, where the Junkers hosted them on their estates as a private army. Also, counter-revolutionary Pomeranians formed Freikorps participating in fights in the Ruhr area. In 1920, the Free State of Prussia adopted a democratic constitution for her provinces. The constitution granted a number of civil rights to the Prussian population and enhanced the self-government of the provinces. The provincial and county parliaments were hence elected directly by the population, including women, in free and secret votes. The Provinzialverband, which included all self-governmental institutions of the province such as the provincial parliament, gained influence on the formerly Berlin-led provincial government. The Provinzialverband would hence elect the Oberpräsident and appoint representatives for the Reichsrat Assembly in Berlin. Furthermore, the Provinzialverband officials could hence self-determine how to spend the money they received from Berlin. Economy. The border changes, however, caused a severe decline in the province's economy. Farther Pomerania was cut off from Danzig by the corridor. Former markets and supplies in the now Polish territories became unavailable. Farther Pomeranian farmers had sold the products primarily to the eastern provinces that were now part of the Second Polish Republic. Due to high transport costs, the markets in the west were unavailable too. The farmers reacted by modernizing their equipment, improving the quality of the products, and applying new technical methods. As a consequence, more than half of the farmers were severely indebted in 1927. The government reacted with the Ostholf program, and granted credits to favorable conditions. Stettin particularly suffered from a post-war change in trade routes. Before the territorial changes, it had been on the export route from the Katowice industrial region in now Polish Upper Silesia. Poland changed this export route to a new inner Polish railway connecting Katowice with the new-built port of Gdynia within the corridor. As a countermeasure, Prussia invested in the Stettin port since 1923. While initially successful, a new economical recession led to the closure of one of Stettin's major shipyard, AG Stettin, in 1927. The province also reacted to the availability of new traffic vehicles. Roads were developed due to the upcoming cars and buses. 4 towns got electric streetcars, and an international airport was built in Altdam near Stettin. The Pomeranian agriculture underwent a crisis. Programs were started to regain soil that had turned into swamps during the wartime, and even to establish new settlements by setting up settlement societies. The results were mixed. On the one hand, 130,858 hectares of farmland were settled with 8,734 new-built settlements until 1933. The settlers originated in Pomerania itself, Saxony, and Thuringia. Also refugees from the former province of Posen settled in the province. On the other hand, people left the rural communities en masse and turned to Pomeranian and other urban centers. In 1925, 50.7% of the Pomeranians worked in agricultural professions. This percentage dropped to 38.2% in 1933. With the economic recession, unemployment rates reached 12% in 1933, compared to an overall 19% in the empire.